Founder and Chief Executive of Eximia Realty. He's also just started a new venture, and he'll be moderating the session and brings vast experience to the discussion. The other panelists that I'd like to welcome: Chris Titmus, Managing Director, West Africa Region, Profika; Nadia Unlimited, Managing Director and CEO of Urban Shelter, our lunch sponsor; and Peter Coker, Managing Director of Crevice Developments. So a very esteemed panel, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Akeem. Peter Coker, is he here? Okay, Frans, I will go find him. We'll begin the session so long and he'll join when he arrives. Thank you, Aki.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. This is, for me, it is obviously the most important session because real estate asset creation is very critical. Everything else sits on top of creation of the assets, and this is the session that deals with that. So we're going to proceed whilst we're waiting for the last panelist to join us. Firstly, my name is Akeem. I have just started the retirement vocation. I was CEO of UPDC for about 8 years. I retired a few months ago, and I'm trying my hands on some entrepreneurship of my own. I'm trying to start one or two things in this space. But in this panel, we have those who are very experienced, those who are very knowledgeable, those who have significant experience and capabilities to deal with issues that arise from factors that drive supply of real estate. Basically, we know those factors, and what we're going to discuss this afternoon is to see how the interplay of those factors, land, infrastructure, regulation, supply chain, how they work together to either drive or inhibit the supply of real estate. And that's what we're going to be doing this afternoon. I'm going to ask my panelists, first of all, to introduce themselves, 2 minutes. Just tell us who you are, tell us what you do, so that the audience will have an idea of the perspectives from which we'll be sharing this topic. I'll start with you, Nadia.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. My name is Nadia Unlimited. I work at a real estate development company, primarily based. Hello. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nadia Unlimited, and I work at Urban Shelter Limited. Urban Shelter is a real estate development firm with over 25-year history in affordable housing, in residential, commercial, and retail units. And on average, annually, we produce over 500 homes. We have a scale from 3 million all the way to 200 million. Our cornerstone of what we do is in terms of making sure homeowners have accessibility to those homes. One of the places we're expanding into is Lagos, and we hope to come online in the first quarter next year in the Omeru axis and the Aja axis. So we're really excited to be here, and we were the launch sponsors for WAPI. We were part of the WAPI family doing their very first outing 2015 in Ghana. So it's good to be back again, I think. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Titmus with a company called Profika. We're project managers. We are a Pan-African company, originally from South Africa, but we've been here in Nigeria for 7-8 years, and we're resident here. We have a full office here, as we do in Ghana and Kenya and several other countries as well in Africa. So we've been here on the ground for some time, and including the Franco regions as well. And just recently, now we also moved into Dubai. Quite adventurous, but yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Okay, so Chris, if I start with you, obviously I had the privilege of working with Profika before, Profika project managers when I built Festival Mall, and so we've worked together. So in terms of your experience in Nigeria and obviously in other West African countries, what do you like to tell us that you could say are the critical drivers of real estate supply? So if you sit down and you are picturing those factors that you pay particular attention to, what are the top two that you'll be looking at, and what's your experience around those two factors?
I think there's two sort of aspects to that. Obviously, the actual the project itself, to acquire the project and to start the project. Starting off on the land, which is probably the biggest challenge in these regions. Not so much on the regularization of the land itself, although that is a challenge on its own, but it's also the cost factor that is deemed for that land, which is traditionally over the last several years been quite exorbitant, one must put that. So a lot of projects don't even get off the ground because the cost of the land is so high, and the proportions of it is just out of sync with sort of traditional models. And then obviously, once you've got that sorted out, the planning of the project, of the whole development, is the most critical aspect. The other parts can be managed in quite a civil way, but if the planning is not done correctly, and we see how many buildings in all sorts of parts of Africa, not only this part of West Africa, but in a lot of Africa, where there's a quarter finished building, half finished building, a 10th finished building, but there are an abundant amount of buildings that just haven't gone and been completed for a variety of reasons. But invariably, whether it's budgetary or otherwise, there's been just a lack of proper planning.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I think because of the spread of urban shelter, I've worked in Abuja for a long time, in a few other states, and now spreading into Lagos. I think you are in a position to shed more light on the issue of land availability. People often say there's land everywhere. Then why do we talk about land availability? It's about access, it's about cost of acquiring, it's about the process of perfecting the title. What would you like to share with us in terms of your experience, specific experience around land in those areas in which you are born?
Thank you very much, and such a great question. Before I get into it, our kind of supply side issues, primarily land, finance, and capacity. And when I say capacity, I mean in terms of technical know-how of how to do it, so the actual bodies, project managers, and so on and so forth. And then capacity in terms of supplies. Will I be able to get 10,000 square meters of tiles by tomorrow? But focusing on the land, like you mentioned, it's interesting to know when you think of the size of Nigeria. Approximately 5% of total land in Nigeria is actually mapped. In other words, it's geotechnically mapped. You can log on, you can find it, it's already sourced for, you can access and know and pinpoint exactly where it is. So when you realize there's such a gap, 95% of which we don't even know on paper or on a computer where it is, it makes it very difficult even when it comes to planning. Now, so currently we're in Niger State, we're in Abuja State heavily, like you mentioned. We're in Kaduna, we're in parts of Sokoto as well. Now, apart from the FCT, the territory of land is in the hands of the state governor. We all know the kind of issues attached to that, which is in terms of accessibility. Every Nigerian, by the way, because of the Land Use Act, you have a right to apply to the state government, or FCT, that's Abuja, to say, I'm a Nigerian, give me land. It's about 50,000 naira for the form. However, reality means you do not get that land. Certainly not perhaps in your lifetime, if you're lucky, your grandchildren. So how do you go about really acquiring land? It has to be driven by the market at times. So you're looking for also that word titled land. It isn't just so much that you find the land, you then have to ensure, are these documented? Are these lands free of any form of encumbrance? You need to kind of do your search and your due diligence. And that's primarily how we do it. So we build up a land bank over our 25-year history. That's made it easier. The second big thing we do, we've approached a number of people, and a number of people again approach us because of our, I think, kind of integrity and spread and credibility in delivering projects. We go into a number of JVs as well. Again, due diligence has to be done in accessing it. And more recently, we've also, again, done a number of partnerships with the governments. We've done huge projects, over 30 hectares of residential projects with Kano State Government alone, about 50 hectares with Niger State Government as well. smaller units with Sokoto state government. So that's kind of a private-public partnership in terms of developing affordable homes through accessing land. They're not sure what to do with their land. It's important to become one in terms of advisory, not just advisory, but also delivering kind of a start-to-finish product. I also sit as the head of the thematic group leadership for urban and regional planning under the Nigeria Economic Summit. And one of the things we're trying to challenge is this access to land, ensuring there is one-stop shop, one place, one office that deals with all land matters that can then be stabilized both in the FCT and in each state, or at least in a regional area. It shouldn't take more than 3 days to access land, to do due diligence, and to get reports back. And it should only cost 1%. So these are kind of the measures that are in place. It's always something that is evolving. And yes, I'm not going to lie, it's a challenge all the time.
Okay, thank you very much. And just to add, also from my experience, also that one of the critical issues on land accessibility is the cost of perfecting the title to land. Because at the end of the day, look at the value chain, everybody along that chain were interested in having a title that has been perfected. And on perfection, there are 3 things you must do. You must do governor's consent, you must do stamping, you must do registration. And these are very, very expensive, not just expensive, they're time consuming. Even in states where they try to put a time limit on it, 30 days, 30 days is 30 days plus X. X could be another 6 months, 1 year, things like that. So all these factors, help to all inhibit the supply of land. And of course, once you have that inhibition of supply of land, it affects the entire value chain together. The other point I like to talk about is infrastructure. I always say that one of the challenges that we have as developers is that every developer, you're like a local government, you're like a mini local government. You have to do your own roads, you have to do your own power, you have to do your own sewage treatment, your own water treatment. In your experience, Chris, how has that helped or inhibited the supply of real estate? If I just talk to specific examples of the projects that we've done, that are very useful to the audience.
Yeah, yes, I think 100%. Obviously, infrastructure is a challenge, and it's not unique to this country or to the surrounding region, but it is a challenge. And if you take Kingsway, for example, everybody wants a piece of land in Kingsway because of a variety of obvious reasons. Accessibility, it's on a main arterial route, and it's properly serviced, in inverted commas. So that obviously makes your whole cost factor and your marketability makes a huge difference to all of that. You go back 1 or 2 roads behind that, suddenly things change quite dramatically. And it's literally as bad as that. So as long as one of the governors living in the road, you're probably going to get retarred or re-bricked or something. But after that, it becomes a problem, and it's inhibitor for the marketing of the problem.
I don't know what I said, I was adding on infrastructure, and then to take the opportunity also to talk about permitting and approval. How in your specific experiences, and I like the fact that you have worked in various states. So you can compare FCT with Niger State. What's your experience in terms of going through the whole org of permitting and approval and all the related things?
Thank you very much. It's good having a moderator that's walked your shoes. And you're right, the best way to describe it is as a real estate developer, you have to be your own mini state, you have to be your own local government. There isn't a development we've done where we haven't had to bring in the power, where we haven't had to break the sewer system and link it to the mains. In some situations, there aren't the mains. That we're waiting for the infrastructure grid to come and meet up with where we are. There hasn't been a state where we haven't had to build the road infrastructure network accessing that. So we tend to work very closely with the governments, whether it's the state governments around the country or whether it's the federal government for FCT to say, well, where are your roads coming up? And if you're not ready to do it, perhaps we could just do it so it makes our clients' lives easier. And you might ask, why does it matter to do this? Because again, you're trying to put yourselves in the position of your client. It isn't fair to invest essentially what is somebody's life savings to kind of access a home, finally get into that home ownership first rung of the ladder, and there's no water, there's no power, there's no sewage, and you're changing the suspension of your car every month. So it's a reciprocal thing. And then what we realized a few years back is to say, look, actually, as a group urban shelter, this is now by default, and we've taken ownership of that, become our corporate social responsibility. because you're doing that access road 1, 2 times 3 kilometers. You're bringing in power. You're rehabilitating schools within that region as well, because like you mentioned, you don't want to get onto the road and it's perfect, and then 2 roads down it looks terrible. So you're creating an entire experience. And with our experience, we found that it can take anything, best case scenario, 10% to 25, 30% of the total cost of your development for infrastructure. So imagine in countries where infrastructure is very much plug and play, which is a statement I've been hearing earlier during the co-sharing. If you had a plug and play approach to development and to projects, you could easily remove 30% of the cost of your house. So that 2-bedroom house for flat for 30, 15, whatever million naira, suddenly drops 30%. Let that sink in. How easily I think government can come in. I don't say easily. Yes, for them too, there's a price tag, but there are just certain goods that you need the state and the federal government to come in. Otherwise, it is factored into a project, and whether we like it or not, it's shared across the clients when they come in. Regarding permits, again, permits, we would love for it to be a one-stop shop. You mentioned kind of the multitude, diversity, and confusion when it comes to looking for permits. We depending on where you are in parts of the world, you're dealing with either just the Commissioner of Land, or you're dealing with the Commissioner of Land, Housing, you're meeting with his plan secretaries and so on and so forth, legal departments, you're leading directly towards the governor in terms of getting legal consent. You have situations where you have to get permission from the development authority. You then have to go back to the building inspectorate for their permission. We've had developments near water, so NIWA, National Inland Waterways, that's another department I didn't know about. The one that really surprised me was recreational parks and recreation. Cleared a site recently, and I like to save trees. I'm the tree hugger of the office. I've been known to change the infrastructure just to suit a particular tree. Again, that's one that pops up. So I think better information means we're more empowered. I think there is a huge cost attached to it. I think there could be strength in numbers and coming to kind of advocate for kind of reducing some of these costs, or at least having it done in a more efficient way so that you're dealing with one body where you can get rubber stamped all under one umbrella, under one office, so that we can really kind of gain traction in terms of projects to the masses.
Okay, I mean, I'm just to add one or two experiences of mine too on some of those issues. On the issue of cost as a percentage of development cost. I mean, I was going to do a project and I had a JV partner from South Africa, and once they found out that the land cost as a percentage of the development cost was about 20%, they just walked away, because best practice should be between 4 to 5%. On the issue of infrastructure, we had a project where in my previous line in Festac. We have a hotel, we have a couple of apartments, 196 flats, and we built a shopping mall, and power became a major issue. And we had to provide IPP on our own, and that we didn't plan for, so those things happen, and they tend not only to affect your cost of development, they also tend to delay the project itself. And on the issue of permit, I think we can do a whole lot better if we are able to streamline the permitting and approval processes. Now you deal with multiple regulatory agencies, and sometimes, I had an experience where we were caught in between two regulators. This one says, don't go this way, this one says, go this way, from the same state government. Eventually it was resolved in our favor. We had waited for 6 months. I know in construction, 6 months, it's like an eternity. So we can do a whole lot better with streamlining the approval processes, let the road be a lot clearer. A lot of the times when the rules are under the table, it's that you have started and they bring the file and say, you are not complying with this, and as a developer, that tends to affect your processes. Just before I throw it to the audience, can we just briefly talk about finance? Because obviously, one of the critical drivers of supply is finance. So I'd like to ask, is long-term capital readily available? I know there are sessions on capital tomorrow, and I'm speaking tomorrow on mobilizing funds for real estate funding. But what's your experience? The ABU fund, you're putting, because we are all over the world, developing ABU fund.
Funding is such a dirty word right now. Finance has become the new F word, unfortunately. It's incredibly difficult, without a doubt. So
I like to believe you.
So So funding is internal, everything that's happening nationally within the country, and again, these are primarily commercial banks, whether we like it or not, and they're not really set up to do development finance, construction finance, or project finance. So there's typically a mismatch in terms of your requirement as a developer, because you're looking for anything, from 3 to 7, 10 years, and banks are typically their risk exposure is 18 to 24 months. Now again, because of history, and I completely appreciate that this isn't going to be typical for everybody, and I imagine this is probably what it's like for you, because there's that history of delivery, there's that history of kind of meeting every transaction. We do get access to what I call medium-term finance, and it's about 5 years on average. Once or twice we've pushed to get a bit more.
What kind of interest rates?
So interest rates, again, it's not great. The best we have, and again, it's not typical, 18%. This isn't typical. It's typically 25, 26, 27. That's ridiculous. I understand the argument when developers are upset that it's 25%, but I think we also need to look more broadly. When your macroeconomy inflation is in the double digits, 11%, and by the way, 11% has been good, it's been stable for a while. Some of you being in Nigeria 3-4 years ago, it did reach as much as 15, 16, 17%. You literally cannot have 5% on finance when your inflation is on double digits. But then again, more can be done, absolutely. You might want to look at subsidized financing, but then again, we know that there could typically be abuse when it comes to subsidies being granted. It's a difficult job for whoever has to decide these things, and I don't envy them in any way. So for local, we have a few banks we partner with. I've seen some of their names actually on the brochure. I won't mention them, but again, we've had a really good long-term relationship. And why break something that's working? We've tried to access finance internationally. I think for Urban Shelter, one of the things we have to do is expanding our growth beyond the shores of Nigeria, and that will make us more open to international finance. We've been close on 1 or 2 occasions, and I think we're confident that 2019, so long as elections go smoothly, for the love of God, let the elections go smoothly, and then yes, I think this would kind of signal even better to the international community that Nigeria is open for business. Companies, therefore, by extension, such as Urban Shelter and Eximia, are all open for business and are credible, worthy companies that can actually do business with.
Chris, just before I throw to the audience, I know Africa, you've done a lot of work project managing, and sometimes a lot of us we underestimate the significance of professional project management, especially large projects. I remember, for example, that I had to learn in a very, very hard way when, of course, protocol, because Africa was there, we started our work without having a tenant coordinator. We brought in the tenant coordinator like a year and a half into the development, and that was a major problem. So your experience, what do you see as the role of professional project management in driving the supply of real estate?
I love the key. The best point we've had. Now, obviously, we chat about this often, and just yesterday we were talking with somebody. A good professional team, and there's a whole lot of definitions of what good is, but just talking from a project manager's point of view, people, on a larger project, they want to negotiate $100,000 off your fees of 3 years. The fees are $100,000, but they want to try and save $100,000. And we just say that, we probably saved you $2 or $3 million on your structure alone, because we've got the experience to understand where we can find savings. We understand what the design should look like. Whilst we're not structural engineers, but we can identify certain drivers that will pull down the price. So that $100,000, if we save you $500,000 on your structure, you use a typical example of the tenant coordination and just general project management. If the planning is done correctly and driven correctly, it's your downtime, or your instead of getting your keys on the 31st of January, you now only get them on the 31st of July. And those 6 months have cost you money to hold finance, you've lost income, etc., etc. So the importance of decent team, in particular project managers, is just invaluable. I think you're quite correct. I think we've seen quite a difference recently over the last couple of years, but 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was absolute anathema that you were a project manager. Today, we're trying to get people to understand what a development manager is. So when you walk in and you show your card, you're a project manager, people are starting to be a bit more receptive. They understand there is some value. The quantum of the value, of course, is the difficult part to try and demonstrate. But yes, it's a massive save, especially in this environment, I might add as well, because it is a challenging environment. And you know, a person who's running the company as a development, they haven't got time to concern themselves with the procurement, the long lead items, the actual performance of the contractors and the subcontractors, even the design consultants. So you know, it is a one-stop shop that pulls them in together, and it saves typically, as we say, time and cost. So it's a huge difference.
Okay, I guess it's the appropriate time to throw it up for comments. Just let me briefly mention your name and then go straight to your. Do you have a roving mic? So there's a gentle lady.
Sorry, comments or questions?
Whichever.
Whichever, okay. My name is Tokumalawa from Wilco Facility Management Company. I just have a couple of questions around, I know you've been talking mostly about grade A properties in terms of project management. Being a facility manager, we're kind of an advocate for the end users. So we found out that there's a difference between when you build and actually the operational efficiency of a building after building. And I know when you have a project manager in the grade A phase, it always works. But most of the time you're faced with grade B and grade C. So have you ever considered having facility manager, just like project managers, consultants at the design stage, to come to the table at the design stage, such that you know your buildings are kind of efficient after building? And have you know, what are those kind of costs? I mean, how does that affect your construction? Have you ever thought about it and then you basically say, well, now it's too high? Because we don't see a lot of that, and it's really, really very much needed.
Chris, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very valid point. You know, the principles remain the same, whether it's a grade A, B, or C type property. The principles are the same. You want efficiencies. I mean, we see on a regular basis, we had a case with one of our clients where I think first of all, the efficiency of the building itself was only about 65%, and we would aim for 85%. So that immediately brings in another 20% of income on the same build cost, for example. So we would start there. In terms of the efficiencies for FM facilities management afterwards, I mean, again, it should be a decent consultant that's doing the design, who understands what the objectives are. The life cycle costing should be a standard process that a MEP consultant should do together with the QS. So the trouble is it's not practiced very often because it's perceived to be a cost issue. And often the running costs are ignored for the capital costs. And it might cost a little bit more, and it may not even, but it may probably cost a small percentage more now to install a good piece of equipment, but it'll save the running costs. And you often find that, especially in this sort of environment, where the developer says, well, I don't have to pay for the utility, so it's not my problem. And I think, you know, one of the other sessions are saying, you know, the rentals are sometimes even maybe less than actual utilities and running costs of the building. And it's just because of, again, bad planning and probably the incorrect consultants, to be perfectly honest.
Such a valid question. I absolutely agree with you. I think, you know, FM facility management is such an important function when it comes to the design process. We've sadly learned this the hard way. So it's only with experience that we've realized this. So some of the earlier projects haven't had this, and you can tell. Whereas some of the last few projects, we've partnered up with a facility management company. So even things along the, and I'm not talking specifically about sort of commercial office buildings right now, I'm talking more along the lines of retail and family residences, where residences are the ones you typically have issues with, a lot of kind of back and forth, an antagonistic relationship sometimes between a developer, clients, homeowners, and then the FM function. And it's partly because this all used to be jumbled up in one. So some of the newer estates, and again, going from the advice of the FM, is to have things like, so a house is independent kind of thing. It has its own separate valve for water, separate valve power, metering, and so on and so forth. So that, you know, if the committee decides to cut off one side, it doesn't cut off the entire estate. It's actually just that side that doesn't want to pay our service charges. I'm not sure how this will translate into the commercial side of things. But I think you're absolutely right. In a country like Nigeria, where relationships can be very difficult to forge at the very initial stages, I think it's a great idea. What we also do is we have a 6-month transition period between the project team and the FM team, so that it's a smooth transition in terms of what's what, where are the mechanical functions, where are the electrical systems based, so that there's like literally a slow handling process, so that for the end user, the homeowner, it feels quite seamless. It isn't kind of very abrupt stop, and the FM facility managers have no idea what the project team are up to, and are therefore stop trying to find out. Absolutely, yes, it's a fantastic service.
Okay. Any other comment or question? I think there's somebody here.
Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Secher from Rogan. Listening to the panel, what we've gotten today is essentially trying to manage construction costs, and from what I essentially doing the same things in a better way. But the way the market is now, from the asset management perspective, the construction cost at this moment is actually influencing the rates at which developers can charge by way of rent and then sale prices. But with the kind of market challenges we're getting at the moment, something more revolutionary needs to be done to be able to drive down the cost of construction such that will meet the market demand. Can we know if there is any such thing in the offing? For example, new construction methods, new construction materials that in this side of the world could be used such that we're able to drive down the cost of construction. Because speaking to our developers, it is a key variable in determining prices, and unfortunately, things are becoming so inflexible in that direction that is why the market is so locked up, by way of prices not meeting what the demand is dictating.
Okay, that's the A-level question. But fortunately, I have A-level. You know, I'm the moderator here,
So there's a multiplicity of answers to that one question. Let me say that in the 6, 7, 8 years that we've been here in Nigeria, we've seen a dramatic drop in costs of construction. And I remember when we were talking about Towns at Festival Mall. I'll use an example. The developer's not in the room at the moment, so I won't say who it is. But we went out for a tender, and it was $82 million for this project. Obviously, it's a large project. We then went out and re-tendered, and we put into the mix a couple of B-grade, Tier 2 contractors, and we eventually closed the deal down at $47 million. So, and that was at the time when everything turned, when the whole economy was taking a turn. And even at that time, I think, if I remember correctly, it was about 498 on the alternate market for Forex. And so even based on that, we pegged it, I think, at 498, if I remember correctly, and then gave a 15 or 20% variable on that. Since then, the alternate rate is what, 365 or there and thereabouts, 360, 370, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been quite stable at that level. We have found, as I said, that the prices have come down, I wouldn't say all come down 50%, but certainly have come down quite dramatically and been quite consistent since then. I don't think necessarily that the cost of concrete, for example, has gone up that much in the last while. I'm talking about the last 2 years. So I think the construction costs are not as bad as they used to be. Now, having said, I'm going to caveat everything by saying this. I think that the designs that are being produced are atrocious in terms of heaviness and cost-wise. And that's probably one of the biggest problems that we're seeing at the moment, is to mitigate those sort of challenges. And on the back of that, obviously, procurement is an issue. There are other design methods and construction methods. For example, one is modular, where you get something made in another country, brought in a pre-constructed format. For example, containers, and there's a big call for that in the hospitality trade. The trouble with that is it's not necessarily cheaper, it's certainly a lot quicker. So your prelims and things are much lower, which brings your construction costs down. The challenge is that to get it from the port here to Ikoi, you probably have half a container left by the time you get there because of the bad infrastructure. So these are sort of elements that need to be considered. But it is possible with clever value engineering, with clever procurement, and again, I say proper planning, because often we see projects stop, start, and then the design. And if you can get those, it sounds complex, but it's not complex, it's actually quite simple, and it should be a normal process. but yeah, it's difficult, but if you can pull it together, it is really, really feasible to make things work.
All right. I don't know if you want to say something, and your closing remarks also.
Okay. Thank you. So there isn't a silver bullet that's somehow going to drive prices of, or the cost of construction downwards. And certainly 2 years ago, we saw a drive in prices due to inflation rising anything from 5 to 30%, 35% when it comes to things like firewood. But when you take a gamut of things, and some of which we discussed today, yes, prices can be achieved within a reasonable level. So some of the, what I call back office issues, the approvals and so on and so forth, having infrastructure, that will bring pricing down. Value engineering, which is mentioned, ensuring that you're delivering the same project but at more efficient costing. Planning in terms of your procurement process, again, that should do so as well. One of the things we've done as a company in Urban Shelter is to say, Sadia, you're not building for Sadia or people in this room. We went back to kind of our NYSC and people that are just graduating, doing their 1-year training with us, seeing where they live, what they do. And we thought, okay, let's, the R&D team, sit down and see, can you come up with a $10,000 home? So we're able to do a large studio for $10,000. This is in Abuja. So you're looking at a bit more than that, I apologize, 3.9 million in Abuja, and it's going really well. What we found, of course, is landlords coming to buy 10 or so and renting them out. We also introduced what we call a 5-year payment plan. We tend to forget, though, that housing is as much as a demand side problem as it is a supply side problem. The house can be 100 million naira. If there's a mortgage that I can get for that, it's affordable for me. The cost isn't an issue. The other thing we're doing as part of our R&D is exploring some of the innovations you mentioned. You hear about, China built a house in 1 minute. There are modular systems happening in South Africa a lot. We always get proposals for that. I couldn't do that in, say, my cousin in Sokoto or my cousin in Lagos. The sand in Sokoto will sink it. The water in Lagos would sink it. We also are researching things very popular right now, 3D printing. Everybody loves 3D printing. What people don't realize is it's still cheaper for us to build brick by brick than to have 3D printing. This is even without the initial investment sunk cost to do it. So there has to be a balance. And then at which point also do we want to replace the, 30, 40 million people involved in construction? Maybe 10 million of those are actual laborers that are earning a salary day to day. Are we ready for 3D printers to take over and take away their 30,000 minimum salaries? If I also am able to actually build 10,000 homes in 2 minutes, there isn't a banking system, there isn't a financial institution today that can create the mortgages for those 10,000 people to come and buy those 10,000 units. They would still be sitting there waiting. So it's such a balance, it's such a seesaw of getting all those components in place. And like I mentioned earlier, thank goodness it's not my job. But what I can do as an individual, I think what our companies are all trying to do, as he's mentioned, value engineering, procurement processes. What we're doing is to say, how do we make costing more efficient? How do we make home ownership more accessible? Both on two sides in terms of construction and accessibility in terms of financial instruments. Did you say wrap up?
Pardon?
Did you say wrap up?
Yes,
okay.
1 minute.
Thank you very much. What I wanted to, again, going back kind of on the supply side issues to say land, finance, and capacity. So on land, it's to make it kind of more, I think, an open market thing, so that those titles, those land that do have land titles, they can be accessed by individuals that have that capacity. They can be bought outright in terms of an open system, actually, perhaps even an auction system. It'll be interesting for me to see financial tools being evolved. I know Extending here, they've been, or in a past life, like you mentioned, they've been involved in real estate investment trusts. It'll be nice to see that become the norm rather than kind of this one shining light. They've done it. Has anybody else been able to do it? Yes, 1 or 2 other companies have. But really, for it to be broad, you want companies to be able to access the markets quite easily, capital markets, in order to raise funding. But also, what's very close to my heart right now is technical capacity. So broadening the capacity, broadening individuals' abilities to actually have these skills to build. And it's something that we've been doing quite passionately in Urban Shelter. So this is taking on whether it's masonry workers, whether it's carpenters, bricklayers, whether it's painters and screeding, and kind of having a mentorship program to push skills so that we actually are building it internally. You don't want a situation where you're having to go to Benin Republic because they're the best time. They're really good at kind of making sure things are done. You really don't want that. You want to make sure that, are we including women, for instance, in terms of project management teams? We're not sidelining them because they want to take a year out to have children. So really putting on that face, you want to look at, again, we don't like looking at it in Nigeria, but yes, certain parts of the country, education perhaps isn't a priority. How do we boost those as well? So I think it's important to take all of these into factors to create a company that isn't just focused on their core objectives of building and developing and real estate, but really impacting society in a much bigger way. Thank you.
All right, I mean, just to round up, just to make some comments. I don't run away from the question, like I say. For me, it raised a very vital point. But the challenge I have, and I speak as a developer, somebody who has done very large projects in the past 7-8 years. Sometimes I get very worried when we're waiting for that big disruptive idea, that will disrupt the industry. What I've seen is that just by taking some very, very critical little steps, you can crash your construction cost significantly. Design efficiency. From the beginning, you have an end in mind. A lot of us used to assume for the customer, both in Nigeria and Ghana, we assume that the customer wants marble tiles, they want swimming pool in every apartment, they want this, they want that. Whereas they don't necessarily need those things. Design efficiency, proper value engineering, space management, how you put what where, a very effective procurement system. A lot of us wait until you're already 10 months into the project before you start ordering your tiles and your sanitaries. By the time they arrive at the wharf, you're already waiting, so you delay. So you're looking at the time wasted. By the time you extrapolate the cost, goes on any of these issues. Thank you and God bless. Thank you very much.